In a quiet corner of rural America, where the fields stretch farther than the eye can see, and old barns hold more stories than you'd expect, one struggling single father takes on what seems like a simple job, repairing a weathered barn for a reclusive farmer. But behind every broken beam and faded plank lies a secret far greater than he could ever imagine. What if the woman he's helping owns half the county and has been guarding more than just her land? Maybe you remember a place like Willow Creek, a town where neighbors looked out for each other, where the old barn at the edge of town wasn't just wood and nails, but the beating heart of the community. A place where life moved slower, but somehow felt fuller. This isn't just a story about fixing a barn. It's about mending hearts, rediscovering community, and finding love in the most unexpected places. If stories of kindness, second chances, and quiet resilience speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss more tales just like this one. Stories that remind us all of the beauty still waiting to be found, even in the simplest corners of life. Now, sit back, take a deep breath, and let me take you to Willow Creek, where a single father's hammer might just rebuild more than wood. The sign creaked as Sam Carter's old Chevy rumbled past it. "Welcome to Willow Creek, a place to call home." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Same sign, same peeling paint, same stretch of two-lane highway cutting, through golden fields of corn swaying in the late summer breeze, yet everything else in his life had changed. In the back seat, 7-year-old Ben Carter was quiet, his nose pressed against the window, eyes wide at the endless rows of silos, barns, and weathered farmhouses. It wasn't the city skyline he was used to. It wasn't the noisy streets or crowded apartment buildings. This was the open country, where the air smelled of fresh soil and hay, and time seemed to slow down. Sam tightened his grip on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Starting over wasn't unfamiliar to him. After all, life had thrown its share of punches, losing his wife 2 years ago, juggling 2 jobs to keep food on the table, raising Ben alone. But something about coming back to Willow Creek made this restart feel heavier, like carrying the weight of memories he wasn't sure he wanted to revisit. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still stood on Main Street, its neon sign flickering. The old hardware store looked as dusty as ever, and up ahead, perched at the edge of town, sat the one place Sam had tried to forget, Hayes Farm. The barn came into view first, its red paint faded, slats weathered, roof slightly sagging. The sight of it sent a ripple of something unspoken through his chest. He'd played in that barn as a boy, sneaked in during summers with the other kids, heard stories of how old Mr. Hayes had run half the county from that very spot. But now, standing at the edge of the gravel driveway, it looked more like a forgotten relic than the beating heart of Willow Creek. Ben squirmed in the back seat. "Dad, is that the barn we're fixing?" Sam nodded, forcing a smile. "That's the one." He pulled up to the farmhouse, engine idling for a moment before he killed it. The place was quiet, save for the faint rustling of leaves and the distant sound of a tractor in the fields. Sam took a deep breath and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. A figure appeared on the porch, a woman, poised, hands folded, neatly in front of her, Margaret Hayes. She was exactly as he remembered, though the years had softened some of her sharper edges. Her hair, once the color of sunlit wheat, now had streaks of silver. She wore plain jeans and a faded flannel shirt, but there was an unmistakable air about her, reserved, distant, as if she belonged to another era. "Mr. Carter?" she called, voice steady but cool. Sam approached, tipping his hat out of habit. "Yes, ma'am, Sam Carter. This is my son, Ben." Her eyes flicked to Ben briefly, then back to Sam. "You're here about the barn?" He nodded. "Heard you needed someone handy. We just moved back. Figured it'd be a good place to start." Margaret didn't smile. Instead, she studied him with that same calculating gaze she was known for when they were younger. like she was weighing more than just the words spoken. "You're a Marine, aren't you?" she asked, almost matter-of-factly. "Was," Sam replied, his voice quiet. A pause hung heavy between them before she turned slightly, gesturing toward the barn. "It's seen better days. I need it sturdy before winter sets in. You'll have full access to the tools in the shed. Payments fair." "Understood," Sam said. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The wind tugged gently at Margaret's flannel shirt, and for a brief moment, Sam wondered what lay beneath the surface of her composed exterior. He motioned for Ben to follow him, and they walked toward the barn together. As they approached, Sam ran his hand along one of the beams. Rough, splintered, but still standing strong despite the years. There was something about it that felt like a reflection of himself. Ben tugged at his sleeve. "It looks like it's got stories, Dad." Sam crouched down to Ben's level, giving him a grin. "Most barns do." Ben's eyes lit up. "Can I help?" Sam ruffled his son's hair. "You can be my right-hand man." He glanced back toward the porch, catching sight of Margaret as she disappeared into the house, door clicking shut behind her. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than she let on. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Sam took a step inside the barn. Dust motes danced in slants of golden light, and the scent of aged wood filled his lungs. His gaze landed on something carved into one of the support beams. Initials, faded but still legible. He brushed his fingers over them. MH and JCA, flicker of recognition stirred. Childhood whispers. Summer nights. Names he hadn't thought of in decades. Sam straightened, exhaling slowly. Maybe this barn wasn't just broken, wood and rusted nails. Maybe it was the key to something he didn't know he was still missing. As he glanced down at Ben, who was already sweeping away dust with a stick, a quiet determination settled in his chest. He'd fix the barn. He'd rebuild their lives. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find a piece of himself left behind in Willow Creek. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains of Sam Carter's modest rental house, casting long golden stripes across the hardwood floor. Outside, the familiar symphony of small-town life unfolded. Birds chirping, a distant tractor, engine humming, the soft rustle of cornfields swaying in rhythm with the breeze. Sam poured a cup of black coffee and glanced toward the doorway, where Ben sat on the steps, lacing his worn sneakers. "You ready to head out, buddy?" Sam asked, his voice warm but edged with a hint of fatigue. Ben grinned, nodding eagerly. "Do you think Ms. Hayes will let me feed the chickens today?" Sam chuckled. "Let's fix that barn first, then maybe we'll see about the chickens." They made their way back toward Hayes' farm, the gravel crunching beneath their boots. The barn stood tall at the edge of the property, its weathered frame catching the morning light in a way that made it look almost noble, despite its peeling paint and sagging roof. Sam paused for a moment, taking it in. Funny how something battered by time could still stand with quiet dignity. "Dad, look!" Ben called, pointing to one of the support beams near the entrance. Carved into the wood, faint but unmistakable, were more initials. Sam leaned in, brushing away decades of dust with his hand. Beneath the rough grooves, he could just make them out. HF, 1946. "Someone left their mark," Ben whispered, as if afraid to disturb the past. Sam smiled. "Looks like this barn's been part of a lot of lives." Margaret appeared not long after, walking toward them from the farmhouse, clipboard tucked under one arm. She wore the same plain jeans and flannel as the day before, her hair tied back, expression unreadable. "Morning, Mr. Carter," she greeted curtly, eyes flicking briefly to Ben. "Morning, Mom," Sam replied, tipping his cap. "We're ready to get started." She glanced at the barn, then at Sam, her gaze lingering a second longer than necessary. "It's not just patchwork I need," she said quietly. "It's got to hold through winter. That roof's seen its fair share of storms." Sam nodded. "We'll make it solid." Margaret hesitated, as if considering something unsaid, before giving a slight nod and retreating back toward the house. As Sam and Ben rolled up their sleeves, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the barn wasn't the only thing Margaret was trying to keep standing. By mid-morning, the scent of old timber filled the air as Sam worked methodically, inspecting beams, jotting notes in his notebook. Ben wandered nearby, peeking into corners, occasionally sweeping away cobwebs with a stick he'd claimed as his tool. The barn's bones were sturdy, but there were hidden cracks, places where years of wear and neglect had gnawed away at the foundation. A lot like people, Sam thought. It wasn't always what you saw on the surface that told the real story. As he pried loose a rotting plank, his hand brushed something wedged deep in the crevice. A folded piece of paper, brittle with age. Curiosity tugging at him, he carefully unfolded it. It was an old flyer, faded but still legible. Willow Creek County Fair, Annual Harvest Dance, Saturday, October 3rd, 1968. Below the title, scrawled in a familiar hand, were the words, "Meet me at the barn after dark." Sam's breath caught slightly. He glanced toward Ben, who had wandered over and was now peering curiously at the paper. "What's that?" Ben asked. Sam smiled faintly, folding the flyer back up. "Looks like this barn's seen more than hay and nails." He slipped the flyer into his back pocket, a strange sense of nostalgia settling over him. Later that afternoon, while Ben helped gather scattered nails into a bucket, an older man ambled down the gravel path. He wore overalls, his weathered face shaded by a broad-brimmed hat. Sam recognized him instantly. Ed Thompson, one of the oldest residents of Willow Creek, known for spinning tales and remembering every face in town. "Well, I'll be," Ed chuckled, leaning on his cane. Sam Carter, back in these parts. Sam wiped sweat from his brow and smiled. "Afternoon, Mr. Thompson." Ed's eyes twinkled as he looked over the barn. "Didn't think I'd see the day someone tried breathing life back into this old place." Sam nodded toward the structure. "Figured it's got a few good years left in it," Ed chuckled, glancing toward the farmhouse. "Margaret's been keeping things to herself too long. This barn used to be the heartbeat of the county, you know. Dances, fairs, harvest dinners. Her folks owned more land than anyone could count. Still do, if you ask me." Sam's brow furrowed slightly. "I thought most of the land changed hands over the years." Ed shook his head, tapping his cane. "No, son. Hay's name's still on more deeds than folks realize. She just doesn't talk about it much. Keeps to herself. Lot of history tied up in these boards." Sam mulled over Ed's words long after the older man shuffled away. Unaware she owns half the county. The thought lingered. He glanced back at the barn, at Ben happily hammering nails into a plank he'd pulled loose. It wasn't just about rebuilding a barn anymore. It felt like there were layers to peel back, stories buried beneath dust and beams, waiting to be unearthed. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Sam stood at the barn's threshold, taking in the sight of it. Weathered, yes, but still standing, just like him. And maybe, just maybe, if they kept at it, this old barn wouldn't be the only thing getting a second chance. The early autumn air held a crispness that hinted at colder days ahead. As Sam Carter drove his old Chevy down the familiar country road toward Hayes Farm, golden leaves swirled in gentle spirals before settling along the ditches. Willow Creek always wore fall well, like an old quilt stitched lovingly over the years, soft at the edges but sturdy enough to weather time. Ben sat beside him, swinging his legs, humming quietly to a tune only he seemed to know. Sam stole a glance at his son, 7 years old, but carrying a quiet resilience far beyond his years. He was the reason Sam got up each morning, the reason he kept moving forward. They turned onto the gravel driveway and the barn came into view, standing stoic against the bright blue sky. Its weathered boards seemed less weary somehow, as if the work they'd started had breathed some life back into its bones. "Dad, do you think Miss Hayes ever played in that barn when she was little?" Ben asked suddenly. Sam smiled at the thought. "I reckon she might have. Everyone around here probably has at some point. Ben looked thoughtful, eyes following the beams as they parked. It feels like it's got secrets. Sam chuckled softly. Most places do, buddy. Just takes the right eyes to see them. They spent the morning reinforcing the outer beams, Ben enthusiastically passing nails and tools like a practiced apprentice. Sam kept his hands steady, methodical, but his mind wandered. The flyer from the day before still weighed in his back pocket, a whisper from the past he couldn't quite ignore. Around noon, as they broke for water, a familiar figure appeared down the path. Ed Thompson ambled up, cane tapping rhythmically against the gravel, a knowing smile creasing his face. "Well, if it isn't my two favorite barn raisers," Ed greeted, nodding at Ben before turning to Sam. "Thought I'd bring over some lunch. Figured hard work's better with a sandwich in hand." Sam grinned, grateful. "Appreciate it, Mr. Thompson." They settled under the shade of a nearby oak tree, unwrapping sandwiches while Ed sipped from his thermos. Ed's gaze drifted toward the barn, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "You know, that barn stood longer than most marriages around here," he said, half joking, half serious. Sam chuckled, taking a bite. "Seems sturdy enough." Ed nodded, leaning on his cane. "Not just sturdy, it's got history deep in its bones. The Hayes family built this county piece by piece. Folks forget that now. Margaret's folks owned nearly every acre you could. See, from here back in the day." Sam's brow furrowed. "I heard something like that. Thought most of it got sold off over the years." Ed's eyes twinkled as if holding a secret. "Not as much as people think. Margaret, she kept more than she let on. Quiet type, but sharper than anyone gives her credit for. After her father passed, she could have sold it all, walked away, but she stayed, held the land close." Sam leaned back, letting Ed's words sink in. It was hard to picture the reserved, guarded woman he'd met holding the reins of half the county. Yet it explained something. The distance in her eyes, the weight she seemed to carry. Ben, ever curious, piped up, "Why doesn't she tell people?" Ed looked down at the boy, smile softening. "Some folks don't need to talk about what they have, son. Sometimes it's the things we protect quietly that mean the most." Sam's gaze drifted back to the barn, protecting something quietly. He understood that. Later that afternoon, while Ben played near the fence chasing grasshoppers, Sam moved to the barn's interior. The afternoon sun poured through the slats, casting warm patterns on the dusty floorboards. He traced his fingers along the beams, eyes catching the faint initials carved decades ago, MH and JC, the same ones he'd noticed before. A name stirred faintly in his memory, Jimmy Carter. A cousin, maybe, long estranged from the family. He couldn't place it clearly, but the initials set off something unspoken. In the corner, he spotted an old wooden crate half buried beneath a tarp. Curiosity gnawed, and he tugged it free, revealing more forgotten relics, rusted tools, empty mason jars, a cracked photograph frame. Inside the frame, faded but intact, was a black and white picture. A young girl, blonde hair tied back, standing proudly beside a tall man with sharp features, the barn looming in the background. Sam turned it over. On the back, scrawled in neat cursive, "Margaret and Father, Harvest Fair, 1965. He stared at it for a moment, an odd ache blooming in his chest. Behind him, the barn door creaked open, footsteps soft on wood. "I thought I'd lost that," came Margaret's voice, quieter than usual. Sam turned, holding up the photo gently. It was tucked away back here. She approached, her gaze resting on the picture, eyes distant. "My father loved that fair, said the barn was the heart of everything we built." Sam studied her for a moment, then asked softly, "Why stop having it?" Margaret hesitated, her expression flickering. After he passed, everything felt too empty. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Two people standing in the dust of memories, each carrying burdens. The other couldn't quite see. Finally, Sam spoke, voice steady. "Sometimes it just takes a little work to bring something back. Margaret's eyes met his, something unreadable flickering there before she nodded slightly. As she turned to leave, Sam glanced once more at the photograph, then at the barn. Maybe, beneath all the worn beams and faded paint, the roots of Willow Creek still ran deeper than anyone realized. And maybe, with a little care, those roots could grow something new. The late afternoon sun filtered through the barn slats like streams of liquid gold, casting soft patterns across the dust-speckled air. Sam Carter wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the progress. The outer beams reinforced, roof patches underway, and the once-forgotten space slowly finding its strength again. But it wasn't just the barn he sensed shifting. Each nail driven in, each board repaired, felt like a quiet unraveling, pulling at threads long buried beneath layers of time, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something far more fragile than timber rested within these walls. Ben's laughter echoed nearby as he chased after a grasshopper, his small feet kicking up clouds of hay. The sound was light, carefree, something Sam treasured deeply. Raising a child alone meant carrying the weight of two hearts. But here, on this land, under this wide open sky, Ben's joy seemed easier to nurture. Sam crouched near one of the barn's corner posts, his fingers brushing against something rough. More initials carved deep into the wood, different from the others. These letters, though faded, seemed purposeful, almost solemn. H, 1937. He traced them gently, wondering what hands had once etched those marks. Another name swallowed by time, another story untold. Find something? Came Margaret's voice behind him, low and steady. Sam straightened, brushing off his jeans. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed loosely, the sunlight catching strands of silver in her hair. There was always a stillness about her, controlled, measured. But today, her eyes softened, almost reflective. Initials, he replied, nodding toward the beam. Looks like this barn's been keeping secrets a long time. Margaret stepped closer, her gaze following his to the carving. A.H. That'd be Albert Hayes, my grandfather. Sam arched a brow. So, it's always been yours. She offered a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. This barn's older than me, older than my father. It's seen weddings, funerals, barn dances, and its fair share of storms. Sam glanced around, imagining the echoes of footsteps, voices, music that must have once filled the space. It wasn't hard to picture, laughter weaving through the beams, lanterns strung along the rafters, the town gathering under one roof. You ever think about bringing all that back? He asked, testing gently. Margaret's expression flickered like a candle caught in a draught. She turned, walking slowly toward a crate pushed against the far wall. Without speaking, she pulled out an old tin box, the kind used to store letters or keepsakes. She knelt, flipping open the lid. Inside, neatly folded papers, yellowed invitations, photographs curled at the edges. This used to be the heart of Willow Creek, she said quietly, pulling out a faded invitation. Willow Creek County Fair, Harvest Dance, 1974, my father. Ran it every year. Said it brought people together, made them feel like they belonged. She paused, eyes distant. After he passed, the fair, the dances, it all faded. Just felt easier to let it go. Sam knelt beside her, glancing at the invitation in her hand. Seems like folks could use something like that again. Margaret met his gaze, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. People moved on, younger ones left town. Traditions don't hold the same weight when the ones who kept them alive are gone. Sam considered her words, then said softly, maybe. Or maybe it just takes someone brave enough to light the fire again. For a moment, the air between them hung still, thick with something unspoken. Margaret looked away, her fingers gently tracing the edges of the paper. This barn was always more than just wood and nails, she murmured. But when you lose enough people, it feels easier to board up the doors. Sam swallowed, understanding all too well. He'd felt that